Architecture as Art of Place, Satoyama and a Poetic Form of Understanding. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Nansan Institute for Religion and Culture for inviting me back to Nagoya. In April 2024, the Institute provided me with the opportunity to explore the relationship between two authors, the Japanese philosopher Tetsuro Watsuji and my professor at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design in the 1980s, the Norwegian architectural thinker Christian Loba. The two authors were both influenced by Martin Heidegger's thinking of Dasein, or being there. However, my work on Watsuji and Loba, still in its infancy, had to be postponed. When I was in Nagoya last year, the inspiration from being here, from experiencing architecture and meeting people connected to the Institute and the Japanese architect Norway Kawashima, opened new doors that made me take a detour. Anyway, through the years I've learned that detours lead the furthest. This alternative route has given me the opportunity to return to Nansan University with a book, a pamphlet entitled Nagoya Satoyama, The Interaction Between Humans and Nature, a conversation with Norway Kawashima. The conversation with Kawashima sheds light on new architectural practices in Japan, founded on a reverence for nature. The book may give an even better basis for the study of connections and differences between Japanese and Western philosophical approach to nature and the relationship to architecture. I'll say a few words on the background for my research and for the conversation with Norway Kawashima. Over the past decades, developments in digital technology have gone hand in hand with and contributed to a changed economic structure, something that has been of decisive importance for the building industry and the profession of architecture, just like even Bendik has been talking about. Around the world, we see the same pattern. Cities are growing at a pace we have never witnessed before, and historic buildings are demolished and replaced by new instrumentally founded buildings with a limited lifespan, often only 30 to 40 years. The desire for profit has resulted in loss of nature and destruction of the landscape during the development of large residential and recreational areas. The desire for profit has also become decisive for the form of new buildings and for historic building environments to be destroyed. As my colleague Bendik has pointed out, several extensive architectural and planning projects have recently been built and outlined in Norway. Projects which lead to major destruction of nature on the same scale as before, despite politicians and authorities' stated sustainability goals. In my view, it is necessary not only to address this built reality, but also to challenge the dominant way of thinking in our culture, in Norway and in the Western world. For me, it has been natural to start with my own field of expertise. I read a few sentences from the foreword of the book. As an architect, I have been concerned with the following question. How can we talk about architectural quality today when our work seems to be so intricately connected to a commodity culture? The Norwegian architectural thinker Christian Loba raised a question connected to our understanding of architectural quality, and I have studied his authorship as a basis for my own investigations. Throughout the last 20 years of his life, Loba clarified the limitations associated with considering buildings as objects, also objects for economic speculations, and not as part of a place. To dwell means respecting the surroundings, yes, making friends with them. Friendship has to do with qualities, he writes in 1978. And in 1996 he writes, the qualitative is what we humans have in common, regardless of where we live, and the art of place is the means that makes it present. Only by understanding the importance of the place's non-measurable qualities can we take care of the architectural history and find a new architecture that belongs to the community. Although he does not mention these connections himself, there is a resonance for Nobashu's thinking of place and emphasis on a poetic, formal understanding in Japanese literature and philosophy. As in the responsiveness that characterizes the poetry of Matsuo Basho and the philosopher and historian Tsuru Watsuchi, he's thinking about Fudo or climate. So when I had the opportunity to travel to Japan in April 2024, it was, as already mentioned, to lay a foundation for further investigations on the connection between Nobashu's and Watsuchi's waterships. They can both be said to represent opposing voices to the way of thinking that characterizes the commodity culture of our time. That there is a connection between our understanding of the world and what we produce and create is a prerequisite for their writings as well as for my own work. Yes, in this context, it was both inspiring and interesting to meet architect Nori Kawashima and to see the 30-year-old converted office building for Asanuma Corporation in Nakamura-ku, a borough in Nagoya. This building, renovated by Nori Architects in collaboration with Asanuma Corporation, was commissioned in 2021. Towards an architecture with nature is Nori Kawashima's motto when designing buildings. Kawashima belongs to a group of Japanese architects who see Satoyama as central for their approach to architecture. Satoyama is both a term that applies to the interaction between humans and nature in a specific area where fertile soil meets the mountainside. The conversation with Kawashima sheds light on new architectural practices in Japan founded on a reverence for nature. Nori Architects has received several awards for an architecture that combines knowledge of new technology and traditional craftsmanship in the desire to rethink man's relationship with nature. So with this conversation, I wanted to learn more about how Kawashima regards the question of architectural quality today and how he meets the challenges he faces in his architectural practice. Through the work on this book over the past year, I've been introduced to a new architectural approach to relationships within the profession. So, meeting with good cycle building. We were 3 architects and an engineer from Norway who took the subway from Nansan University to Nakamuto-ku on a warm and sunny April day last year. After walking a few hundred meters, we came to a building that immediately stood out from the surrounding buildings, not in terms of volume or even in its main form, but in that its facade consisted of a lush garden. A garden was supported by 6 giant cedar trees. After a short while, architect Nori Kawashima and his family arrived, and we stood outside the 30-years old converted office building and looked at the new garden, a garden that, it turned out, can be reached from every floor. We studied the light trunk of the tallest cedar trees, local trees that had been stripped of their bark and branches. A wide staircase and ramp, which cover around 2/3 of the width of the building, lead visitors to the first floor. Behind the entrance door is a large open and welcoming space, a space that ends in a staircase that receives lights from above. Inside, there are wide wall surfaces in a terracotta tone on the right. In the gaps between the wall surfaces, and there are doors to 3 meeting rooms. The floor is the same terracotta color as the earthen walls. The earthen walls are built in a traditional way, and the users of the building have participated in making them. Their fingerprints are visible, giving the walls a distinctive structure. In the book Nagoya Satoyama, Nori Kawashima talks about how the users' participation was crucial for the walls to be built like this, because in this way the users will also be able to contribute to the necessary maintenance. He says, I mentioned earlier that Satoyama is a place where you can see wisdom in the form of making things yourself, using materials that can be returned to the earth that is right there, maintaining them yourself, enjoying the process, and this also leads to attachment. I think that this attachment is very important for achieving the sustainability that is required in the modern world. No matter how high performance a building is, if it is not attached to, it will be torn down soon. If the users of the building have an attachment to it and maintain it themselves, it will lead to sustainability. I think that the importance of this kind of maintenance is also a topic of conversation among other Japanese architects and construction companies. After the first impression from the meeting rooms of tables made of bark and lamps made of paper and leaves from the cedar trees, we went through the floors until we came to the auditorium in the upper floor. Outside the auditorium, in the vertical garden, there was a small Buddhist chapel where the employees can pray for their sanity. I will now not go into further detail on the experience of architectural qualities while we were in the building, but just state that it was immediately easy to feel at home here. Or the way Robert Schultz may have expressed it, to make friends with this building because of its qualities. As I see it, Robert Schultz was right when he wrote that the quality, quote, quality is what we humans have in common, regardless of where we live, and the art of place is the means that makes it present. Although capitalism is globalized and the desire for profit is a worldwide phenomenon, I found, both through visiting the Good Cycle building and through the conversation with Nori Kawashima, insights that are rooted in a different understanding of our earthly existence and a different approach to our relationship with nature than the form of cognition that is dominant in the Western world. As mentioned earlier, Robert Schultz, thinking of place and his emphasis on the importance of a poetic form of understanding, as in the responsiveness that characterizes the poetry of Basho, can be seen as an opposing voice in this connection. In the Western world, architecture has, since the time of Kitarō, been understood as the interaction between the nustas, utilitas and firmitas, of form, use and technology. In other words, the interaction means that architecture is understood as a cultural form of expression where aesthetics and ethics and technology are united. Form was always connected to the given natural conditions, and such an understanding is evident throughout the centuries in both the form of style and traditional architectures, moving forwards towards our time. But after René Descartes formulated his famous doctrine, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, and established that this was the only source of wisdom, modern thoughts withdrew from nature. In the book Sacred Nature from 2022, the British author and religious educator Karen Armstrong writes that thought now stood alone. It had become autonomous, and constituted a world in its own right, unaffected by everything else. The material universe was lifeless, godless, and immobile. It could not tell us anything about God or about ultimate reality, she emphasizes. In Descartes' works, according to Armstrong, there is nothing left of the awe that had characterized traditional perspectives of the divine. In fact, the things of nature resembled the new machines that were now appearing in the 17th century Europe. Clocks, mills, and fountains. They had no inner life, and their value lay solely in being useful and beneficial. In other words, the stage was set for the future exploitation of nature. Descartes, his rational thinking was important for Isaac Newton. In Newton's theology, God was reduced to a scientific explanation, Armstrong argues. Extending the words about domination in the Genesis creation account, Newton defined God's innermost being as dominatio, dominum, which he identified with the overwhelming power of gravity, a force that governs the cosmos. The idea of domination, which also took on political dimensions, formed the basis of European empires around the world, Armstrong argues. Nature was seen as a resource to be exploited. There was no transcendence, for God was simply a larger and more powerful version of the human scientist. As part of this development, the profession of architecture was split in two, which is reflected in the establishment of the École Polytechnique, founded in 1794, and the École des Beaux-Arts, 1648, in Paris. After the first ironworks were established in the 17th century, the new iron products would contribute to change society dramatically. With the iron, an artificial building material appeared for the first time in the history of architecture. In Das Passagenwerk, Walter Benjamin writes that already with the great passageways, which were centers for luxury goods, art enters into the service of the seller. Most of the passageways were built in the first 15 years after 1822. And the prerequisite for the passage was both the boom in the textile industry and the use of iron constructions. With Benjamin, one can argue that the struggle between the engineer and the decorator begin with the division into the École Polytechnique and the École des Beaux-Arts. This is a struggle that eventually formed the basis of the modern movement in architecture and for the desire to re-establish architecture as an art form. The Swiss art and architecture historian Siegfried Giedon was the Secretary General of SIAM, le Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne. SIAM was established in 1928 by leading European architects with the intention to revolutionize architecture and city planning to serve the interest of the society. Giedon became the professor and mentor of my professor, Christian Oberschulz, when he went to study architecture in Zurich. Together with participants in SIAM, wanted to develop, quote, new ideas of how to shape the urban environment in a rapidly changing world. This later came to be known as the modern movement, After the World War II, Siam included architects from the United States, Canada, and Japan, and now the problem of the post-war era, with a focus on how to build enough houses for the people who needed shelter, eventually resulted in a conflict between the founders of the Siam and the younger members. Siam came to a dissolution in 1959. However, Gideon continued to be an important voice after the war. His intention was to restore architecture as an art form after the split between thoughts and feelings that had taken place in the wake of the Carte. Gideon and Oberschulz shared the experience of crisis within modernity, connected to a loss that asked for new ideas of how to shape our buildings and cities. Oberschulz's work can be regarded as a continuation of Gideon's effort to give modern architecture an academic anchoring after the Second World War. Oberschulz writes about the loss of vernacular architectures and architectural styles after the war, and he sees a need for establishing a general theory of architecture as a necessary replacement of the lost tradition. He was known worldwide for his book Genius Loci, towards a phenomenology of architecture, where he tries to establish a new phenomenological ground for the field of architecture. In Genius Loci, Oberschulz writes, "Dwelling implies something more than shelter. It implies that the spaces where life occurs are places, in the true sense of the word." And he continues, "A place is a space with a distinct character. Since ancient times, the genius loci, or spirit of place, has been recognized as the concrete reality man has to come to terms with in his daily life. Architecture means to visualize the genius loci, and the task of the architect is to create meaningful places where he helps man to dwell." Oberschulz's notion of genius loci, the spirit of the place, is closely connected to how each part of the earth has a certain light, decisive for its atmosphere. After all, Oberschulz says, quote, "Light is the principle, the medium that is present everywhere." According to Oberschulz, it is only by understanding the importance of the place's non-measurable qualities we can take care of the architecture of history and find a new architecture that belongs to the community. A poetic form of understanding grasps the meaning of things rather than their measurable properties, he writes. And he continues, "Nothing exists in isolation. The connections of things are their meaning. The flight of the seagull shows us this. Often it stands in space almost motionless, telling us that there is a difference between up and down, and that everything that happens takes place between heaven and earth." As mentioned in the beginning, Norway Architects has received several awards for an architecture that combines knowledge of new technology and traditional craftsmanship in the desire to rethink man's relationship with nature. This approach has similarities to Oberschulz's intention of getting behind the subject-object economy by focusing on our embeddedness. But the premise is obviously different. In the conversation with Norway Kawashima in Nagoya Satoyama, he does not seem to recognize the dividing lines that characterize the dominant way of thinking in the Western world after the Carte. The marked dividing lines between religion and science, aesthetics and ethics, visible and invisible in the Western world, dividing lines that have partly ended up undermining the profession of architecture, do not exist in the same way in the thinking that Kawashima and his colleagues advocate. Kawashima's approach to architecture is founded on a reverence for nature, he says. We live on this planet and we live in connection with many different things. It is in this connection with others that we can find delight, and it is in this connection that we can transform ourselves. However, in today's cities, it is difficult to feel that we are living in such a connected way. This is why I think it is important in this age of environmental crisis to actively incorporate nature into modern cities, such as Tokyo, which are densely built up with buildings. Kawashima also says, looking back, we can see that modern architecture and cities have not made appropriate use of such local resources. Even though sunlight and natural wind are present, we have created closed environments and tried to regulate the environment using mechanical equipment that burn fossil fuels extracted from deep underground in distant places. Even though soil and wood are found locally, we have used materials such as iron and oil-derived materials extracted from deep underground in distant places. We feel as if we are living in a world where only humans exist. Norway Kawashima makes it clear that taking care of the nature right where we are is a condition for our earthly lives. This is both a culturally based and philosophical approach, where what we are immediately sensing and our experiencing of qualities are brought to the forefront. For Kawashima, a scientific approach to architecture is also important, but it is obvious what comes first and what comes next. Everything is not given the same weight. From the very beginning of the conversation in Nagoya Satoyama, Kawashima brings something new to the understanding of the role of the architect, compared to the approach to the brilliant architect we are used to being presented with. He does not believe that only one architect should be given credit for the ideas of Satoyama. These ideas come from a continuation of the past and through collaboration with architects of my generation, he says. Also in this way, the most important things are brought to attention. I agree when Kawashima says that today, quote, the global environment and future generations are being exploited and they are not able to raise their voices. Respect and awe for nature can be found in Christianity. This is what I say. Respect and awe for nature can be found in Christianity, but it is the way nature has been understood in Western science and philosophy from the 17th century onwards that has led to a rupture, according to Karen Armstrong. This is a rupture that must be repaired. So, yes, let us continue. Let us give the importance of caring for nature through our way of building a voice. And continue the conversation from here, across borders, about a new way of thinking and seeing. Thank you for your attention.